This is Lisa Miller and Associates, Florida Insurance Roundup, your podcast on the people, issues, and regulations shaping Florida's insurance market. Now, here's Lisa Miller.
Welcome, friends. The state of Florida is doing it again. We are taking action to better guide and police professional engineers who write damage reports in insurance claims, and often you'll see their reports in lawsuits. As a matter of fact, there's a rule by the Florida Board of Professional Engineers. It's a new rule, and I'll say it quietly, and we'll put them on our show notes, but it's Rule 61G 15-38. 61G 15-38, and you can read it if you're wanting to look at it while you're listening to this podcast on the Florida Board of Professional Engineers. That's fbpe.org. And the comments about this rule, you have to get your comments in by March 31st. But in a nutshell, our guests today have been driving these new rules and talking with the Board of Professional Engineers, who's been listening, that we need to get to a better place. Oftentimes in these claims lawsuits, you'll see what we call dueling engineers, and we need to put some guardrails around what's happening in these lawsuits. So these guests we have on today, they made their case. They were frustrated with what's been going on in recent years, what they're seeing in the courtrooms and, in negotiations, particularly on the plaintiff side in claims lawsuits. And these cases typically involve roofing and roof damage. And of course, we all know that y'all been with me listening to the Florida Insurance Roundup podcast for the 10 years I've been doing it, and you followed the roofing insanity that had been going on in our state until the governor and legislature put a stop to it. So today I'm honored to have two incredible professional engineers that are not only engineers, but public policy gurus, if you will, in their space, trying to make their industry and those that have that license better. And joining us today is George Miles, Senior Principal Engineer with Alligator Consulting Engineers based in Edgewater. I have seen George over the years. He's written damage evaluation reports. He testifies in insurance claims in both civil and criminal court. He carries the mantle of the moniker professional engineer. And he also has held contractor licenses in every facet of construction, from sewer systems to water systems, electrical, plumbing. I mean, he's just done it all. George, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to discussing multiple facets of the insurance industry and the engineering side and what that plays in the future roles.
Absolutely. Thank you, George. And also we have Steve Circle. He's a principal engineer at Tri-State Consulting Engineers, a civil engineering firm servicing the Pacific Northwest of the United States, but spends an awful lot of time in the Southeast, including Florida. 32 years in the business. He focuses on land use development and forensic engineering, and has a lot to offer today on our podcast about post-catastrophe inspection work here in the great state of Florida. Steve, thank you for joining us on our roundup.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I come from the space where I've spent decades working in the property insurance and disaster recovery industries, and I've just heard and read stories, of course, in the Insurance Journal and Insurance Insider and other media outlets about these damage claim lawsuits that have what I'll call suspicious or suspect testimony from an engineer, quote, on the other side, typically representing the plaintiff, that's been invited to the proceeding by the plaintiff lawyer. But I had no idea there's really been no formal oversight or accountability, if you will, for Florida's 46,000 licensed professional engineers. And, I see the heavy regulation that occurs with insurance companies and insurance adjusters and public adjusters and lawyers. So it seems like the engineering space might have been the wild, wild west at some point. And it looks like, George, you're trying to do something about it. Tell us more.
To start with, the Florida Board of Professional Engineers is a little bit handcuffed that there's no ethics rules in the state of Florida. They didn't implement those, where in a lot of states there are ethics rules. Those rules obviously put ethics and morals into the engineer's job of writing a report. by not having those rules, it did make it a little bit like the Wild Wild West. You could write a report and it could be ethically, nothing is correct in it. And I'll give you some examples of those in a minute. And there's nothing that they could really do but give you a little slap on the hand and here is your letter of guidance to tell you not to do that again because you're not being ethical, but they can't say that. They give an example of one of those. One engineer specifically, he made up a method. This method basically said that wind as it went over a house would speed up. This is completely untrue. Nothing further from the truth. He added all of these factors to it and everything, and he testified in court to it for years. When I saw it, I knew it was false. He went as far as taking a NASA document that said this theory was false, cutting out the picture of the NASA document to just show the diagram, and used it to try to prove his method was true. Keep in mind, this was a document by NASA saying this doesn't work, and he took the picture to try to say that it did work. And we turned him into the board, I did, and the board told him not to use that method anymore. This method he developed, he actually worked with a lot of other engineers who would testify in court and supply it as evidence as well. And again, this is the ethics rules were missing. They made up something completely using a false theory and testified to it in order to try to win their case. And that's really what started me down this road, was looking at this avenue. And I've talked to Steve about it. I've talked to several people and it was, well, do something. So I did. And I got the letter of guidance issued against him to tell him to stop using that method. And he continued to use it. So there's kind of where it's at today on that one. But I've continued over the years. I believe I'm on 18 engineers I've turned into the board. Some have gotten letters of guidance. Some have hired a legal attorney who's made an argument back and forth. And without that ethics rule, it's really hard to make anything stick. You have to have something that is substantial before the board can really do anything, unfortunately.
So basically, George, you got on your white horse and you rode. And oftentimes we in this industry will complain to each other. I often say sometimes the lobbyists lobby the lobbyist, and we chuckle about that for those of us that are doers. And I am sure that the Board of Professional Engineers is probably very appreciative of your leadership in trying to help them help their peers. We've read, that the board's prosecuting attorney has said it's difficult to find probable cause against an engineer, even when a complaint is valid, like yours, George, without having rules in place that address reports and standards for existing damaged buildings. And often the number of complaints, as we are seeing, have grown over the past 4 years, and they concern buildings, particularly during severe weather. Blue skies, it doesn't seem to be as acute. Steve, I'll get your take on this. I mean, you're out in the Midwest. You do business basically all over the country, probably worked with many boards of professional engineers in other states. What are you seeing out in the marketplace when it comes to trying to keep the profession professional?
A lot of it boils down to education of the insured. Quite often when I interview homeowners, as we do for every single inspection, to kind of get a feel for where they first noticed the damage and to kind of help justify and help, evaluate with the supporting documents that we get when we do inspections, as far as photographs or mold assessments or mitigation reports that have already been done prior to our inspection. But it's good evidential facts to look at when we evaluate regarding probable cause or origin or duration, even more important. When we work with insurance companies, that's primarily a lot of what our scope is they haven't been able to rule out exactly how it happened. Was it related to a catastrophic event, hence being a hurricane or a hailstorm or a severe windstorm? So, when we interview these homeowners, they are just uneducated and they don't understand what is covered in a policy and what is not. And quite often I'll get homeowners that'll testify that, a roofing company knocked on my door and asked to get up on the roof, and then they came down and said I had hail damage, so I submitted a claim, and all my other neighbors are getting new roofs, so figured I'd submit a claim. That's really what inundates a lot of the insurance market, is that there's just a lot of inaccurate claims, for homes that have roofs that are not properly maintained, and interior and exterior. If you aren't painting your exterior of your home, on a regular basis, anywhere from 4 to 6 years in the state of Florida, with the weather that we have, that's going to create, damage. It's going to create cracking in the stucco, and then you got interior moisture intrusion. That's deferred maintenance and not necessarily caused by a catastrophic event or wind or storm event.
You think about the professional engineers trying to get the public engaged in this discussion. And I often say, people that come to your back door. Those that come to your front door, we as Floridians in our neighborhoods don't answer the front door. And Steve, that would solve a lot of this problem if we had folks that just didn't answer their front door. And even more importantly, not allowing people, when they say, can I get up on your roof? Don't let somebody up on your roof unless it's someone you've hired to be on your roof. And we've worked diligently for over a decade to try to educate the public about that. I was looking at some of these rules that have been promulgated, love that word. It talks about the general responsibility of engineers conducting damage evaluations. And the last bullet 4, says that that engineers must conduct evaluations and procedures, including investigations, inspections, testing, and reporting consistent with ASCE, of course, the SEI standard 11-99, which is the guideline for structural condition assessment of existing buildings, which standard is incorporated by reference, and we can certainly look that up. And what this rule is doing is it's putting a marker out there, much like the CFO did during Hurricane Helene. Shortly after Hurricane Helene, the CFO's office issued an emergency rule that just documented that adjusters needed to write down and document everything and not put it on the back of a napkin. And you laugh when I say that, but there are just a handful of people, public adjusters, sometimes insurance adjusters, that don't want to use the tools that are needed for a professional claims evaluation. And I think that's what these rules are geared for. George, I'll go back to you. When you see a report that is fraudulent, or you feel like it's fraudulent, what are the triggers in those reports that tell you something smells?
I'll use a pretty straightforward example that you take a tile roof. And a tile roof, you have tile roofs in Europe that have been there for hundreds of years. I've inspected tile roofs in Florida that are 50, 60 years old that are maintained. You will get reports that will make the claim that 50 to 70 mile an hour winds damaged a tile roof, and they'll have claims such as chatter. And if you really understand a tile roof, you'd understand that 50 to 70 mile an hour winds can't pick up a tile in the field of a roof. 50 to 70 is really hard pressed to even damage the hip tiles, as far as if they were unbonded and just loosely setting there, they may be able to move them, but I don't see them being blown off the roof ever with those kind of winds. The biggest thing we see is what's called chatter, and I'm sure everyone's heard this term before. And so let me give you a little short analysis of what that means. Chatter occurs, and it will occur at high speeds, usually around 115 to 140, depending on the weight of the tile. And what happens is the uplift force is equal to the gravity force holding the tile down. So essentially those two balance and the tile becomes weightless when it dances around because of the wind, because it's being picked up by the same force that's holding it down. Then it will chatter and rock back and forth if it is loose. If it's not loose at all, and when I mean loose, you got to be able to pick it up a decent amount. If it's just enough that you can pick it up a quarter inch or so, no. And that chattering, yes, that can break. But if you go look at historical videos of when that chatter occurs right before the tile leaves the building. So essentially, we see things like that, and they're red flags. Chatter, whenever you hear chatter, it's a giant red flag. When you hear lifted, if I hear that term, whether shingle or tile, that's a red flag. You can look at a roof and what do you mean it's lifted? Shingles are laying flat. The tiles laying, they were lifted. Can you prove they got lifted? No. Unless you show me a video, no.
And interesting, Steve, that I'm sure you know John Pistorino. He was featured in the Insurance Journal magazine, one of your great colleagues. He's in Miami. He's a structural and civil engineer, and he sits on the board's probable cause committee. And he was quoted as saying, quote, "Some of these reports are just fraudulent." He also said, the engineer didn't even go and look at the property. They just looked at photos. And he went on to note that, one of the plaintiffs testifying engineer claimed to have written as many as 300 reports in a year. How, and I'm asking you this, my experience is that engineering reports after the first initial inspection, and you conclude your inspections, can take weeks to get it right. So I ask you, Steve, I'll throw it to you. How many reports do you write in a year? And George, same for you. What is the right amount of time? And do you believe that a competent professional engineer can do? I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's nuts.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was doing some quick calculations on that, and I'm more remote. And so from where I am locally wise, George does more than I do, but I average about 10 to 15 a month. But you're right. It does take time. You absolutely have to put boots on the ground. You have to visually see the damage. Otherwise, you shouldn't be putting your professional seal on any report, period. Because there's just not enough documentation that can be provided that you can just assume, because a lot of times I get it requested to evaluate. Well, can you evaluate additional information provided by the insured? Well, if I haven't seen it, no, I cannot. That's unethical. As engineers, we have morals and values and ethics that we have to abide by. And so you have to be there. And even if I was to live there full time like George does, get to 300. I've heard some stories, Lisa, that you'd stated. I've heard about engineers that have not even put boots on the ground and write reports. And it to me would be fraudulent. You absolutely cannot ascertain the exact damage, determine the cause, origin, and duration of any type of damage from a claim without visually seeing it, in my opinion.
As I scan through these 18 pages of proposed rules, it talks about proper writing of reports on different types of roofs, wall opening systems, or what I call windows and doors, wall cladding, wood siding, stucco. George, can you get really granular with our audience, particularly our audience, as you know, are claims adjusters and claims professionals and underwriting professionals, so they know the gravity of these rules and how much work you put into making professional engineering and its landscape better? What are in these rules, George?
Well, I'm going to back up just a little bit to give a good idea of how we're going to move forward with these rules, and to understand that what we've seen over the last several years was a change in the report writing by the plaintiffs' engineers. What a lot of you guys have seen out there is a report that's now coming in with no meat to it. It will have background on the property. It'll have the weather, has all this description of what they're seeing at the site, and then conclusions. There's no engineering section whatsoever describing how it's related, how they came to their conclusions, any of that. It's all gone, because that was what I was picking apart and I was turning them in on. So what they do, they just got rid of that section and said, well, it's my professional opinion. But when you ask them why, they don't have anything to back it up. So what these rules are doing is they're throwing in the enforcement of it, that if you want to write a report that's damage testing, then you're going to use approved testing methods. They got American Society of Civil Engineers, and you have 7-22, which is the wind analysis. That's how we get all the wind dynamics and pressures. You have the American Standard and Testing Methods, ASTM. You got all of these different testing. You have several agencies that come up with methods for testing tiles, for testing even floor tiles, nails, anchors, all of these things. You must use their standards or studies, reports, etc., and show that in your report. You need to list it out. So this is how I came to my conclusion. This backs up what I have. What this does is it puts the standard of care. What standard of care means is I am going to supply you with the information of how I came to my conclusion. I can't just come to my conclusion. That's not a professional engineering main method. You can't just go, hey, magically ta-da, it's there. And by my experiences, we get to use our experiences to better knowledge ourselves, but we need to be able to back that up with calculations, studies, reports, whether FEMA came up with it or anything. And the best example of this, which anybody that has done roofing has heard of this, it's called the brittleness test. It is a fake test. It does not exist in the real world at all. It does not exist anywhere in the real world. And every article you ever read on a brittleness test will talk about how this test is kind of being done, but there is no standard. That means that no standard test method has been derived. The reason is a shingle roof is temperature dependent. I can take a brand new shingle, throw it in a freezer, pull it out, and if I try to bend it, it'll break. Brand new. But if I heat that same shingle up to 100 degrees, I could roll it up into a circle without a problem. Same thing with an existing roof. If you've got a decent roof that's not 35 years old, just to the extreme, it can be really stiff in the mornings, but you could heat it up artificially, either with a torch or anything, and the shingles become pliable and easily manipulated. So you will get these engineers and roofers claiming that they did a brittleness test and the roof is brittle and can't be repaired. And it's a completely untrue and false statement. This proposed rule change would mean if you cite a brittleness test, you then violated these rules because there is no brittleness test. So there's my 2 cents on it. And I think I'd like to throw us over to Steve. And Steve, what do you think about these rule changes and how they'll help fix the problem we're currently going through with the engineers on the plaintiff side?
Based on the rules and these rules, I think it's a great step in the right direction to establish some guidelines and goals that not only are we held to as engineers, but for the insurance world, for everyone to be educated of what we're doing. There is a lot that goes into every one of my site evaluations and reports before I put my seal on it. I have no objections to. I think it's a step in the right direction for other engineers that aren't necessarily doing this. Everything that you opine to, you should have facts to back that up with formal evaluations of why you say that instead of just, well, it's my opinion. I have experience in the construction industry as well, so I know how everything is installed. And if not, I have to do a little additional research to provide that in my reports.
I'm going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to talk about a property insurance claim. In my business, I talk to realtors, I talk to contractors, I talk to engineers, I talk to claims professionals, legislators. Remember, the theme of my business is talk to us before you talk to them. So having said that, tell me what it's like, George, the day in the life of a claim, from start to finish, when you get a call from a claims professional that says, we need your help. Tell us what the cycle of that is. Tell us from what vantage point you come from, and tell us why sometimes people think that that's, quote, just not right that you're hired by the insurance companies. Give us your perspective about that. We'll let Steve talk about that. Go ahead, George.
Well, to start with, we actually will work for both sides. We've worked for plaintiffs and defense before, as far as that. So we don't take a side, and we don't ever actually take a side. That's not our job. Our job is simply to go evaluate. In a proper engineering role, the plaintiffs and the defense should send out engineers and the reports should match up identically. And that's the truth. They should be identical because both of them should be equally qualified and do equal the job to evaluate it. And they shouldn't have the discrepancies that we're seeing. That's why these rules are coming into play. And that becomes the biggest issue. When we get a job, we'll receive a work order. We're actually a third party. We don't work directly for the insurance company. And we get a task. Go evaluate a home and determine causation and duration is the most times, depending on what it is. It could be for tinted floor tiles. It could be a leak at the kitchen sink. It could be a ceiling stain, and they want to know, when did it start? How long has it been going on? What's causing it? And that's what we do. And we explain what we find, and we try to determine how long this has been going on, what caused it. And that gives the insurance company the ability to say, okay, whether covered or not, we don't care. We don't have a dog in that hunt. We don't get paid by, as far as how much money is paid out or not paid out. That's not it. We get paid a set amount. We don't care whether they get paid or not, to be honest, and we never should. That brings into the moral side of things. I can have empathy for somebody, and I can feel really bad for them. And I have. I went as far as calling churches to tell a church that, could you send somebody out there, because this is not going to be covered, but they need help. And they sent people out. And I actually had a church I know up north that they actually helped fix a lady's home, knowing that it was not going to get covered by the insurance company because we had proof that it had been leaking for about 10 years. Don't ask, that's another long story. But that goes into the fact of our job is duration, cause, effect, and so on, so that the insurance adjuster can make a proper evaluation. So, Steve, what's your input on this? What's your thoughts?
I agree with everything that you just said, George. You're absolutely right. A few things that I'd like to add to that is, as we interview and we do inspections, several a day, quite often, each one is unique. I really enjoy doing them because I get to meet new people and whatnot. And I'm empathetic to the homeowners because they don't know any better. And as I stated earlier in the podcast, it comes down to education of what your policy is, what it's covered, or their lack thereof, more importantly, of what's covered and what is not covered. Quite often I'll ask the insured, what do you do when you buy a newer car? Something with a warranty. What do you do every 3,000 to 4,000 miles? They pause for a minute, but most people, it's a pretty easy and obvious question. Well, I have to change the oil. Well, why do you have to change the oil? Well, because I don't want to avoid my warranty. Quite often, homeowners buy homes and they're told by the agent or, the salesman, the realtor, hey, this comes with a 50-year warranty, a 50-year roof, or a 25-year roof if it's shingled and it's a brand new roof. So out of sight, out of mind, your roof isn't the first thing you see when you drive home every night after work. But the fact is that if you don't maintain the roof, then what happens to your warranty? I find myself educating homeowners more so than not that, if it's a tile roof, more importantly, requires much more maintenance, that you've got to annually go up there and inspect your ridge and hip tiles. And because in the state of Florida, with the mortar set on hip and ridge tiles, they come cracked and they get debonded. Because mortar is a concrete-based product, it's going to crack. There's always a guarantee in concrete it's going to crack. Same thing with exterior cladding with, stucco. The point of painting, and most HOAs require homes to be painted every 4 to 5 years because the heat and the humidity and the temperatures fluctuating in the state of Florida, that'll crack because stucco is a concrete-based product. So when moisture gets exacerbated out of the cladding from the temperatures, then it's going to crack. So fill the cracks and repaint your home. That's what I find mostly, that, it's educating the insured on what their policy is and whatnot. I like, Lisa, that you had stated that on one of your other podcasts that homeowners should be talking to their insurance company once a year. I really like that. I think that's a very smart move. I mean, that's what they're getting paid for. They're paying a premium for them. So educate yourself on what is covered in your policy and what is not. Then that can help you understand what you need to maintain and whether you have a claim versus letting a public adjuster telling you that, yeah, I can get you this much dollars and whatnot, because they're paid on a percentage, not on a case-by-case basis. And George is right. We have no dog in the fight. We're there to do a non-biased engineering opinion on what the cause, origin, and duration of the claim damages, and that's it.
Excellent input, Steve, and I appreciate you listening to a previous podcast. I never thought about the fact that so many of them are connected, but they really are. I do talk to consumers all day, every day. It's part of my practice, and I'll say to them, have you talked to your insurance agent lately? And of course, I'm going to remind listeners, including those of you that are in the industry, to tell your customers, talk to us every year. Ask this question, consumers, if you're listening, and those of you as practitioners in the industry, ask your customers, if your house were to burn to the ground, do you have enough money in your insurance coverage to rebuild it? The best way to find that out is to go have lunch with your favorite contractor and ask them and update your coverage. You don't want to have inferior coverage when the worst happens. So with that preaching, I want George to close us out here. He put some folks around the table and has come up with an engineering guide, if you will, on how to examine wind damage tile roofs, kind of like a, kindergarten book, if you will, on how to do this and how to do it right. George, you want to comment about that? I know it was put in the Insurance Journal with very detailed bullets. We will post that on our show notes, but just give us a couple of the highlights, George.
I did write a guide a few years back. I worked with a friend of mine, Daniel Freitz. He's another engineer. And we came up with a guide to really understand tile roofs. And this all developed as I got to know tiles more and more and understanding the roof systems and the cladding and everything with it. It was really needed that we had to have a guideline of this is how you evaluate it to eliminate the fraudulent aspects that get thrown out there, such as chatter, or even the aspect you hear lifted tiles. You can lift it more than 2 inches. That's been disproven for years. So we came up with this guide. We proposed it to the Insurance Journal, and they did publish it out there to help the adjusters and to help other engineers to look and evaluate roofs that are tile and say, oh, this is related to wind damage or not. And a lot of broken tiles would get broken. And we would see reports that would have everything on the roof claimed as wind damage. Doesn't matter what it was, as for how it was broken, anything. Even I've been on a golf course, and on a roof with golf balls on the roof, and having a public adjuster telling me that all of the broken tiles were due to hail. And there's golf balls on the roof. Okay, I want you listeners to understand it. Hear that again. I was on a roof with broken tiles and golf balls on the roof. So obviously the roof wasn't damaged by hail. And in fact, you would find that the fairway would have a faucet facing it, and that's the faucet with all the broken tiles. Yet they would claim this was all due to hail affecting one area of the roof. And that's where we were trying to come up with a guideline for people to read it, to understand, look at your parameters, look at what's going on. Even look at the trees that surround it. Was there tree branches that fell on a roof? And you can get that historically. Is this really a wind damage claim? Because if the wind never got to those speeds that need to be reached to pick up a tile, it's not wind damage. That's why we came up with a guide, and we really hope that it would help a lot of the adjusters to get a better understanding. So when they would throw these reports at it, or the roofer would make these claims, they could say, I've read this and I understand now what's behind it. I have the knowledge to say no. And they can hire their engineer. And if these new rules go into play or not, we can always write a report that says no, and here's why that report is false or why the roofer is wrong. And for me, it's a fight. Steve and I have been going down this road. I've bounced stuff off him now and then, and he does the same thing, that we try to work with each other to better the industry. And that's our job. We're here to work for the public and help the public, but also educate the public.
Thank you, George. George, this is so awesome. Steve, you two have just been marvelous. And it's opened my eyes because, of course, 60% of my work is in the claims arena, making sure they run smoothly, making sure, that my clients, typically are insurance companies, keep their promises. They're doing great work out there. I often tell legislators and regulators, come spend a day with me out in the field, particularly after a storm, and watch what happens. And so, when I said at the beginning of this podcast, you got on your white horse and you started writing, the guide that you've written, these rules that you're pushing, it's going to get better. And we appreciate you so much. Thank you, George and Steve, for being here. Remember, for those of you that are listening or catching this late, George is a senior principal engineer with Alligator Consulting Engineers, and he's out of Edgewater, Florida. I know we'd love to hear from you, and certainly you can comment when we get these things out on social media. Certainly give George a shout out. And same with Steve Circle, principal engineer at Tri-State Consulting Engineers. Just thank you both for being on the Florida Insurance Roundup.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
I am so happy that we were able to put this together today. It's taken us a little bit with the demands of the legislative session. We're taping this in March of 2026, and that's been quite an interesting time up at the Capitol for the past couple of months. But, when I pivot over to engineering, it's not exactly a field that you can do or to have a report done that's not top of class. That's not a center of excellence, if you will. They have to be right. They have to be precise. And there's just no way to kind of do things, half-heartedly. These damage evaluation reports are very technical, and they are required and needed, particularly whenever these claims may go to court. So if you work in the disaster insurance or recovery arena, I urge you to read George and Daniel's guide. We'll have that on our show notes, talking about tile roofs and what should and shouldn't be done. We'll have a link to all of it for you to read today. And of course, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this podcast or ideas for new ones. What did you learn today? Share that with us. You can call us at 850-388-8002. That's 850-388-8002. Or send me a note at Lisa Miller at lisamillerassociates.com. That's Lisa Miller at lisamillerassociates with an S on the end.com. And please follow us on our social media accounts like LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and hit like and follow and do all those great things that you do when you see me out there in the social media, because I'm doing my best to spread the good word. And George and Steve have done that today. If you want to stay in the know, stay close to me, stay close to my firm and all the great people I have in my orbit. And you can sign up free for our newsletter and our podcast. And with that, I'll close it out. And thank you for being a part of this podcast, to our great guest. We have a passion for good public policy and client success in my practice. And all of you have been so special. Remember, I can't do what I do unless you do what you do. And with that, stay safe, Florida.
This has been Lisa Miller and Associates Florida Insurance Roundup, your podcast on the people, issues, and regulations shaping Florida's insurance market. For more information on today's program, please visit us on the web at www.lisamillerassociates.com.